Take it off! Now! The command cut through the chapel like a slap. Sharp, icy, uninvited. Master Sergeant Harold Benton didn't flinch, but his fingers tensed around the cap in his hand, old knuckles whitening just slightly. His other hand trembled once, almost imperceptibly, before falling still. The man who barked the order, the funeral director, tall and pale, sunglasses still on indoors, stepped closer, his whisper sharper than a shout. "I said, no costumes during services, this is a family funeral." Harold's uniform, deep navy, medals glinting faintly in the soft light, remained untouched, unapologetic. He said nothing, only lowered his eyes, not in shame, but in restraint. Behind him, guests shifted in their chairs, unsure whether to watch the casket or the man being silenced beside it. A child clutched his mother's sleeve. An elderly woman squinted, confused, lips parting to speak, but saying nothing. The director straightened his tie and turned to the gathered mourners. His voice was colder now, low but clear. "Let's keep this respectful, folks. No distractions. Please." Hal Benton took a breath, shallow, heavy. Just then, a teenager, no more than 15, caught the faint tremble in Hal's hand. He looked at the medals pinned across the old man's chest, then back to the director's narrowed eyes. A phone lowered in the middle pew. Someone had been filming, not for spectacle, but to remember, to bear witness. And from beyond the stained glass windows, the air began to shift. At first, it was only a hum, then a pulse, a metallic thunder far away. Boots, engines. It was coming closer. Something, someone, was coming. But inside, Hal Benton stood alone, and no one had yet remembered why he was there. If you believe every veteran deserves respect, subscribe, because every view helps this message reach those who need it most. The sun had barely crested over the low hills when Harold Benton woke. The light was soft, the kind that slipped through blinds like memory, not quite warm, not quite cold. He sat up slowly, feeling the familiar ache in his shoulders, the dull pinch behind his knees. Age had become a silent companion, predictable as breath. His house was quiet, always was these days. The clock in the hallway ticked, the same rhythm it had kept since 1974. He sat on the edge of the bed for a moment longer than usual. On the small table beside him sat a photograph. His wife, Elsie, smiling in a summer dress, a blue ribbon in her hair. He reached for it, pressed a weathered finger to the glass, and nodded once. "Today's the day, love," he whispered. "I'm keeping my word." Down the hallway, his boots waited, polished the night before. The uniform, pressed, ribboned, deliberate, hung on the doorframe. It still fit, barely. He took care of it as he did everything else that mattered. Quietly, thoroughly, with reverence. In the kitchen, the coffee pot chugged to life, black, strong. No cream, no sugar. He stood by the counter, hands curled around the warmth, eyes drifting out the window toward the elm tree out front. The flag he'd hung in the yard stirred gently. Beneath it, the grass was still marked from where he knelt every Memorial Day. By 7:10, he was seated at the table, his breakfast untouched. One egg, one slice of toast. The radio played low, static between gospel hymns and weather reports. Rain by evening. On the wall, framed and scented, hung his shadow box. Bronze star, purple heart, Vietnam, Desert Storm, a folded flag beneath it, the one they'd handed him for Elsie 5 winters ago. The man who presented it had hands that shook. Harold's didn't. He walked with slow precision to the bedroom again, buttoned the dress blues, straightened the medals. His breathing grew steady. He checked the mirror, not for vanity, but alignment. The badge on the left, nameplate right, cap brim polished. He gave one nod, then turned to the photograph once more. Gonna do right by that boy. He stepped out into the crisp morning air. A teenage boy from the house next door watched him from the porch, earbuds in. When Harold passed, the boy muttered under his breath, "Try hard." Harold heard it, said nothing. His gait didn't change. But the words caught, just a little, like a burr in his coat sleeve. He'd grown used to it, the sideways glances, the smirks. These days they didn't throw stones. They threw silence. At the cafe on Oak Street, the bell above the door jingled when he walked in. The girl at the counter, no older than 20, looked up from her phone. "You're here early, Mr. Benton. Got a service to attend." She looked him up and down, eyes pausing at the ribbons. "That discount still valid for guys your age?" He paused. "Not long, just enough. Only if the country's still standing," he said, voice flat but calm. Her lips twisted, unsure if he was serious. She rang him up with a shrug and passed the receipt without a word. Back outside, a couple in a white sedan slowed as he crossed to his car. The woman leaned to the man behind the wheel and whispered something. Her gaze lingered on Harold's uniform. Then came the tilt of her head, pity mixed with suspicion. "It's a funeral, not a parade," she said under her breath. The window was down. He heard every syllable. Still, he pressed on. Got in his car, drove to the chapel with both hands firm on the wheel. By the time he parked, the parking lot was already half full. Folding chairs had been set out. The flowers had arrived. The casket, flag draped and still, rested beneath a stained glass cross. Harold stepped out, dusted his cap once, and walked to the door. Inside, the air was colder, cleaner. It smelled faintly of lilies and floor polish. He was shown where to sit, but before he did, he approached the front, slowly, reverently. He stood by the casket, eyes scanning the corners of the polished wood, the folds of the flag, the photographs nearby. Ronald as a boy, Ronald in uniform, Ronald smiling with his mother at graduation. It had been 18 months since that rescue convoy. He'd kept his promise. From the side entrance, a man in a dark suit and sunglasses approached. Harold hadn't seen him before. "You must be the one who asked to speak," the man said curtly. "Yes, he asked me. In writing, I was—" The man cut him off. "Well, we have a schedule. You'll get your turn if there's time." Harold nodded slowly, said nothing more. He sat near the front, straight, hands resting on his cap, and from the far corner of the room, a faint vibration passed through the floorboards, like boots, marching, but not yet. The chapel filled slowly. Rows of guests trickled in, speaking in hushed tones, brushing damp coats, adjusting ties. Someone placed a worn Bible on the front pew. The family sat closest to the casket, their eyes red-rimmed, their faces pale from exhaustion. Ronald's mother, Elise Miller, had aged 10 years in the span of one. Her hands clutched a handkerchief but didn't move. Her gaze stayed fixed on the flag. Harold Benton remained near the front, seated just off-center. The sunlight through the stained glass painted him in hues of gold and violet. His back was straight, his boots still polished. His presence, though silent, had weight. A few guests nodded in quiet recognition. A few avoided looking at him altogether. Then the director returned. He moved like a man who mistook solemnity for control. Stiff arms, controlled breath, sunglasses never once removed. With a clipboard clutched to his chest, he approached Harold again, this time in front of others. "You'll need to remove the jacket if you want to remain seated, sir." Harold blinked once. "I wore this to honor the fallen." The director's voice was low, but barbed. "This is a family service. Theatrics don't belong here. We have a standard to maintain." He placed his hand lightly on Harold's shoulder, as if to usher him toward the back. The gesture was gentle in form, but not in meaning. Hal did not move. His shoulder, though old, was immovable. Across the room, a girl, no older than 17, elbowed her father and whispered something. Her phone now rested on her lap, camera still running. From the second pew, Elise Miller looked up. Her mouth parted slightly as if to speak, but the director had already moved on. The chapel doors were closed now. The program began. A few family members read passages, trembling through tears. A cousin spoke softly of childhood summers and backyard fireworks. A friend recited a poem Ronald once loved. Then came the pause. Harold shifted forward slightly, reaching into his coat for the short folded page he had written earlier that morning. His hand trembled, just once, then steadied. But before he could rise, the director spoke. That concludes our scheduled remembrances. Let's move now to the benediction. A hush fell across the room. Confusion, then a few startled glances. Elise rose from her seat. "Wait," she said, voice cracking. "I asked him to speak. Harold Benton." The director turned toward her with a smile that didn't touch his eyes. "We have policies. Only immediate family, ma'am. I'm sure his intentions were good." "He is family," she whispered, but it went unheard. Harold stood anyway, unfolded the paper. But before he could read a single word, the assistant director, younger, stiffer, colder, stepped forward from the side aisle. "Sir, please sit down or you'll be escorted out." He didn't shout. He didn't raise a hand. But the weight of those words was enough to freeze the room. Across the aisle, a teenage boy rose from his seat. "I think he should speak," the boy said, his voice higher than he expected but firm. The assistant's head snapped toward him. "Sit down, or be removed." The boy's mother pulled gently at his sleeve. The boy sat, his ears burning. Silence settled again. Harold sat slowly, folding the paper along the same worn creases. He felt not shame, but something worse. Erasure. Then came a sound. A phone vibrated against a pew. A woman, seated near the rear, finished typing a message. One hand hovered near her coat pocket. She had seen everything, and so had her camera. From beyond the walls, the distant metallic sound grew. What had once been a hum was now a low roll, heavy, rhythmic. A motor, or perhaps boots, marching. Inside the chapel, the service moved forward. But something was coming. The words of the officiant echoed faintly through the chapel, but they barely touched Harold's ears. He sat motionless, one hand on the folded speech in his lap, the other resting against the polished brim of his cap. He could hear the cadence of the service, the prayer, the reverent pauses, but they no longer belonged to him. He had been written out, a footnote to someone else's grief. Beyond the stained glass windows, the light shifted. Inside, the director stood near the pulpit, one hand resting on the casket, as he read aloud a verse meant to comfort. His voice was too smooth, too measured, as if he'd read it 100 times without ever hearing the words. No one interrupted him. Not yet. But the sound outside was growing. At first it was a pulse, distant, faint enough to be mistaken for traffic on the highway, but it was not sporadic. It was steady, deliberate, like boots on concrete, like something organized, something intentional. Harold tilted his head slightly, just enough to catch it. He didn't smile. He didn't rise, but his fingers curled slowly around the brim of his cap. Across the aisle, the woman with the phone noticed it too. She looked toward the rear windows, squinting at the shifting shadows beyond the frosted glass. A hush fell over her row. One by one, heads turned. The director paused mid-sentence. "Let us remember Private First Class Ronald Miller, not only for his bravery, but for the quiet moments that—" He stopped. The windows behind him flickered with movement, silhouettes stretching long and slow as sunlight poured over a line of arriving forms. The frosted glass did little to soften them. Boots. There was no mistaking it now. Boots, marching in perfect step, measured, heavy, dozens. The woman in the second row gasped softly. Her hands rose to her chest. From the corner of the room, the teenager who had earlier spoken now stood again, not asking permission this time. He took one step toward the aisle. Then came the sound of a low rumble. Engines. Not loud, but steady, controlled, reverent. A line of motorcycles, each flying an American flag, pulled into the lot outside. Their tires rolled over the gravel like thunder softened by reverence. A single word slipped from Harold's lips, barely above a whisper. "Core." And then the door opened. Not flung, not forced. It creaked gently, like an old memory being remembered. The assistant director turned sharply. his mouth already forming a protest, but stopped. In the doorway stood a Marine officer, dress whites, gloves white as bone. His face was unreadable, not hard, not kind, simply resolute. He stepped inside without a word. Behind him, they came in formation. Marines, young, steady, their steps synchronized with solemn rhythm, boots striking the floor like a drumbeat of honor. The room stilled. Even the lilies on the altar seemed to bow under the weight of what was entering. The director took a half step forward. "I'm sorry, but this is a private—" The officer didn't respond. His eyes were already locked on Harold. He walked the full length of the aisle before stopping beside him. "Sir," he said, voice deep, unwavering, "we received word that you were denied the floor. That will not stand." Harold looked up. The lines around his eyes were wet but unshaken. He did not nod. He did not speak. He rose. The room watched as the Marines flanked the casket. One of them removed his cover and placed it gently on the folded flag atop the wood. From the open chapel door came the slow, mournful breath of a live bugle. Not from a speaker, not from a phone. From a Marine in full dress standing alone on the lawn. The first note of taps filled the air. It was not loud, but it carried everything. Every missed birthday, every letter unread, every brother never brought home. When the last note faded, the officer turned once more to Harold. "The floor is yours." Hal Benton stood still for a long moment. The air around him seemed suspended, as if even time dared not move. He reached into his coat pocket and drew out the folded paper again, its creases deep from the time it had spent unopened in his lap. As his fingers opened it, they trembled, not from fear, not from weakness, but from reverence. His voice, when it finally came, was low, dry at first, but strong. "I met Ronald Miller 6 years ago at the recruitment office." He paused. No one moved. Even the birds outside seemed to hush their wings. He was 17, barely had peach fuzz on his chin, wore sneakers with holes in them, said he wanted to be a Marine because his grandfather had fought in Korea. Hal glanced toward the casket. The flag atop it didn't move, but it carried more than cloth. I told him there were easier ways to serve, but he shook his head and said, "I want to be useful. I want to matter." His voice deepened with each sentence, growing steadier, grounded. Ronald didn't want medals. He wanted meaning. Someone sniffled softly. A woman pressed a tissue to her lips. When he was deployed, we wrote letters back and forth. I'd tell him stories from my time in Kuwait, and he'd send back jokes I couldn't understand. He always ended every letter the same way. "Still want to matter." Hal paused to unfold a second page. A breeze slipped through the open doors and moved across the chapel like a silent witness. "I want to tell you about the last time I saw Ronald." He looked straight ahead now, no longer at the page. "Iraq, 2004. He was pinned under fire. I went out in a rescue truck, though I was supposed to stay behind. But I had trained that boy. I knew his walk, his voice, the way he held his rifle. He was mine to bring home." The silence in the chapel became heavier than any sound. We got him out. He bled, but he smiled. Said, "You always come through, old man." That night, in a tent lit by lanterns and dust, he made me promise something. Hal stepped forward, not looking at the crowd now, only the casket. He said, "If anything ever happens to me, I want you to speak for me. Don't let me be forgotten." Hal placed the folded paper beside the flag. I kept that promise. A sob broke in the back of the room. Not dramatic, just real, raw, unfiltered. The young Marine officer who had first entered stepped forward and stood at attention. Slowly, he saluted Hal, arm high, motion clean, unwavering. Hal returned the salute. The precision was not perfect, but the intent cut through the air like sunlight through storm clouds. Then it began. The teenage boy who had spoken earlier rose again. This time, no one told him to sit. He placed his hand over his heart. Others followed. One by one, the guests stood. Some saluted. Others bowed their heads. A woman clasped her hands tightly, lips moving in silent prayer. Even the funeral director, the one who had ordered Hal to the back, remained standing. His sunglasses were gone now. His eyes were wet. His mouth quivered, but he said nothing. Elise Miller stepped forward. She reached out and took Hal's hand. "My son trusted you with his voice," she said, "and you gave it back." Hal nodded. He couldn't speak anymore. Outside, the Marines stepped back into formation. The motorcycles idled quietly. The wind shifted through the trees. The moment held, and then it let go. 2 days after the funeral, the story began to spread, not through headlines or outrage, but through something stronger: reverence. A single video posted online by the woman who had been recording from the second pew carried Hal's quiet speech, the salute, and the arrival of the United States Marine Corps Honor Guard. The caption read, "He was told to sit down. They stood him back up." By nightfall, thousands had seen it. By dawn, the number had tripled. But it wasn't the views that mattered. It was the comments. "My father was never allowed to wear his uniform again after his discharge. This gave him his voice back. We don't just bury soldiers. We bury their stories if we don't listen. I wish someone had stood for my brother the way this man stood for his." The funeral home received calls. First just one or two, then entire threads of voicemails, emails, handwritten letters. Veterans, families, teachers, clergy, all asking the same thing. Why was he silenced? The funeral director, the man in sunglasses, the man who had said, "now," like a warning, was placed on administrative leave within the week. His replacement, a woman named Janine Torres, requested a meeting with Hal directly, not for optics, for respect. They met at a quiet bench in the memorial garden behind the funeral home. "I've reviewed the footage," she said softly, hands folded in her lap. "And I'd like to ask your permission to make something right." Hal said nothing for a long time. Then he simply nodded. Within 10 days, a small but significant renovation had begun inside the chapel. A room previously used for storage was emptied, painted, and renamed the Veterans Honor Room. Inside, a plaque was mounted, in memory of Private First Class Ronald Miller, and the voice that would not be silenced: Master Sergeant Harold Benton, United States Army, retired. The room displayed folded flags, black and white photos of servicemen and women, handwritten letters, and a single glass case with a copy of Hal's folded eulogy resting beside a bronze nameplate. Media coverage followed, not tabloid noise, but quiet pieces on local stations. One reporter interviewed Hal, asking what he hoped people would take away. He said, "I don't need anyone to remember my name, just his." Elise Miller was invited to speak at 2 memorial events, one hosted by the Veterans of Foreign Wars post in their town, the other at Ronald's former high school. She asked Hal to stand with her each time. He didn't speak. He just stood, cap in hand, eyes lowered, a steady sentinel. Then came the letters from young men and women. Some had never served, some were preparing to enlist. One wrote, "I was never sure if wearing the uniform still meant something. Now I know it does." Hal read every single one, folded them neatly, placed them in a shoebox beside his wife's old photo on the mantel. He didn't write back. He didn't need to. They had heard him. And more importantly, they had heard Ronald. The morning air was cool, touched by the scent of damp earth and pine. The sun, still low, cast golden light across the cemetery grass, turning each blade into a thread of amber silk. In the distance, a flag stirred softly, slow, rhythmic, like breath. Hal Benton moved slowly up the winding gravel path, dressed in plain clothes now, no medals, no ribbons, no ceremony. Just a navy blue windbreaker, slacks, polished shoes. In his left hand, he held a single white rose. The petals trembled slightly in the breeze. In his right hand, he carried nothing. It hung at his side, loose, quiet. There was no service this time, no officers in formation, no instruments, no eyes on him. He preferred it that way. The cemetery was empty, except for a gardener trimming hedges near the rear fence and a pair of doves pecking softly beneath a maple tree. Hal reached the grave marker slowly. Private First Class. Ronald E. Miller, United States Marine Corps. April 5, 1985, October 19, 2004. He wanted to matter. The words were etched clean, deep, easy to read. Hal knelt beside the stone. Not stiffly, just a slow descent, knees gently folding to the earth like old hinges remembering their work. He placed the rose just beneath the flag mounted in the holder. Then, with both hands, he straightened the miniature pole so it stood upright again. Its shaft had been tilted by last night's wind or time's quiet hand. For a long moment, Hal said nothing. He simply sat there, fingers brushing the edge of the marble, eyes lowered. Then came the whisper. "They listened," he said, voice dry but steady. "You weren't forgotten." He reached into his coat and drew out a small item, a folded card, worn from being opened and closed too many times. He didn't read it aloud. He simply placed it gently beside the rose and leaned back on his heels. In the far corner of the cemetery, a child's laughter echoed, high and clean, like a bell through the trees. Somewhere beyond the fence, a bike rolled by, gears clicking, life moving forward. Hal stood slowly. The wind caught his jacket as he rose. It fluttered, then settled again. He took one final look at the stone, then turned, and walked back down the gravel path, the sound of his footsteps softer than before. Each step lighter, each breath easier. As he disappeared into the amber light, the flag behind him rippled once more. Not loud, not showy, just present, still standing. If stories like this resonate with your heart, like and subscribe for more untold moments of honor and kindness. Let us know where you're watching from, and if this moment brought back memories you carry with you. The best way to honor their memory is to keep listening. Click on the suggested video now, and we'll walk together through another untold chapter of courage and sacrifice.